The purpose of Freethought Forum is to be vigilant to the encroachment of religion into government and to educate the general public as to what a freethinker is.
My thoughts give me power.
No scholar can map them.
No hunter can trap them. No person can deny. Die Gedanken sind frei. No person can deny. Die Gedanken sind frei.
Hello, my name is Hugh Henry, and this is Freethought Forum. And we're here to talk about Yule, ancient Yule, and its traditions, which we still observe, and came from long before Jesus became the reason for the season. I will mostly be using this book, The Winter Solstice by John Matthews. This will be my guide for the ancient sources of Yule traditions. Now, this book is about non-Christian sacred traditions. It talks about how to celebrate a sacred Yule. It's New Age, it's neo-pagan, it's got chants, it's got ceremonies, it's got display and altar suggestions. At times, it's like a sacred pagan Martha Stewart. Why should atheists celebrate Yule or Christmas? What's it got to do with logic, reason, and science? We atheists will celebrate Yule with a party. Are we just doing what everybody else does? Are we like the newer Jewish tradition, re-emphasizing Hanukkah with a Hanukkah bush as a Christmas tree, so kids and grown-ups won't feel left out? That's almost how the Christians put Christmas on this 25th of December, but more about that later. What we have, both ancient and modern, is a whole holiday season, not just one day. If you belong to a number of organizations, you're going to be attending a number of Christmas parties, plus the office Christmas party. And this would be like Christmas was celebrated shortly after the Revolution in this country. Now, this long season includes Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, even Halloween. Teachers know that this is the season for lots of colored paper cutouts. You can even extend it to include Mardi Gras. Then it stops. The rest of the year, we have Easter and 4th of July, and that's it. This holiday season, we have family reunions at Thanksgiving and Christmas, costuming at Halloween and Mardi Gras, gift-giving at Christmas and Halloween, and parties for all of them. The old Yule was not one day, but a season of parties over many days. Note that in the rest of the world, Americans are notoriously stingy with holidays, except, of course, compared with sweatshop workers in Asia. But still, what's it to atheists? Bah humbug? Chopped liver? Well, I intend to use logic and reason to show why atheists should celebrate Christmas. So how did it begin? It is just before sunrise on a cold December day, some 3,000 years before the coming of Christ. For those crouched at the heart of the mound, it must seem as though light was banished forever. Then, suddenly, a tiny sliver of sunlight strikes a stone slab at the back of the chamber. Slowly it widens, climbs upward, illuminating a number of mysterious carvings, circles, spirals, zigzags. For the people crouched in the center of the great mound, Bragnac Boyne, also known as New Grange, every symbol has meaning. But by far the greatest significance is the return of the sun itself. The light that enters the dark womb of the earth brings with it the promise of a warmth and life to come. We could have chosen Stonehenge for this. We could have chosen certain sites in the American Southwest where, among the rocks marked with figures, the sun suddenly forms a huge sun dagger. The light that brings with it the promise of warmth and life to come. That's the key. That concept alone is the reason for the season. For the Celtic peoples of Northern Europe, the year began with the festival of Samhain, on or around October 31st. The winter period extended until Imbolc at the beginning of February. Between these two poles, the celebration of midwinter season was seen as a time when the dead came close to warm themselves at the hearth fires of the tribe, and when the health of the people and its animal stock had to be maintained at all costs. This was a period when sacrifices and offerings were made to Kilog, the old woman who ruled over the winter season. The rituals of Samhain were concentrated primarily with the dead, divination with storytelling. Offerings would pour out for the ancestors of the tribe. Divinations were made to explore the status of the coming year, and the dead ancestors were remembered in story and song. The depths of winter were called Andudlok, the gloom, and the seasonal revels were presided over by a king with a blackened face, whose emblem of office was a sword, a scythe, or a sickle, representing the sudden curtailment of life that could occur at this time. It's probably from that threatening figure that stories such as the medieval Gawain and the Green Knight derive. The more recent character of the Turkish knight in European mummer plays has many of the same attributes. Many features of Celtic traditions have been carried over into modern festivals, and traditions surviving in the festival of Halloween, also known as Mischief Night or Punky Night. The modern pursuits of trick-or-treat has resonances from a time when such games would have been played at the doorways, not of houses, but between worlds. The Christian feast of All Saints on November 2nd has drawn upon many levels of these ancient customs, particularly the festival of Samhain. Many Roman Catholics in Europe and the Americas visit cemeteries on these days to light candles on the graves of the dead. In Britain, this occurs a few days later on Armistice Day, when the fallen of two wars are honored. The bonfires of Samhain are now more likely to be lit in Britain, at least on November 5th, when Guy Fawkes is remembered for his abortive attempt to blow up the Houses of Parliament in 1605. This figure indeed has taken over the sacrificial aspect of the feast. Imbolc marks a loosening of the winter's grip. At this time, new lambs are born, and the ewes are in milk, hence the name of the festival, which may be translated as ewe's milk. In an age that depends on the production of foodstuffs by modern farming methods, it is hard to imagine that winter would have been like without fresh milk. Yet neither ewes nor cows will lactate unless they have given birth. The protein from new milk, butter, cheese, whey, not to mention the pies made from the dock tails of lambs, would very often make the difference between life and death for both the very old and the very young in the hard frosts of winter. Then there's Roman custom. Saturn's Games. The ancient festival from which we derive many traditional celebrations associated with winter is Roman Saturnalia. The Roman presence in Britain and other parts of Europe from the 2nd century BC to the 4th century AD probably accounts for this. During this time, Romans suppressed many of the older practices of the Celts. Saturnalia itself developed from older rituals of midwinter into a riotous assemblage of fun, laughter, and gift-giving. It is indeed from this festival that we derive the idea of giving gifts at Christmas, and not from the gifts of the Magi, as is commonly supposed. As its name suggests, the celebration was in honor of Saturn, the Roman god of agriculture and time, who is thought to have received his name from the Latin satis, to sow. His feast was celebrated from December 17th to the 24th, during which time normal patterns of social behavior were abandoned. Masters served their slaves, who dined with their usual masters, wearing the badge of freedom known as the pileus. The law courts and schools were closed. The whole community gave itself to feasting, gambling, drinking. Indeed, it was so noisy, the celebrations, that the author Pliny built himself a soundproof room so he could work during the holiday. The festival began with a sacrificium publicum, in which a young pig was sacrificed in the temple of Saturn in the Forum. The senators put aside their togas and assumed less formal attire, and gifts were exchanged, among them wax tapers called Syriae, symbolic of eternal light, and terracotta dolls known as signallaria, which may well refer back to a time when human sacrifices were offered to the gods of midwinter. Certainly Saturnus was known to have a consort, Lua Mater, who governed the baneful influences, Lares, to whom soldiers' weapons were offered. The festival of Saturnalia continued to be celebrated every year right up until the end of the 4th century, when it was moved to New Year and became amalgamated with Calends of January. Calends was itself a significant part of the midwinter celebrations. It has lent its name to midwinter festivals all over the Western world. Initially, Calends followed Saturnalia, beginning a few days' rest to allow aching heads and stomachs to recover. At this time, new consuls were inducted into office. For at least 3 days, high festival took place. Houses were decorated with lights and greenery. This greenery is where we get the greenery of Christmas. And gifts were exchanged. It was also the custom to give special presents to the emperor. We mentioned the greenery of Calends, but the Christmas tree is actually modern, at least in its widespread observance. The earliest mention we have is from Strasbourg in 1608. The mention is a complaint about the pagan practice of Christmas. We see mention again in England in 1789, but the real boost came from Albert, consort of Victoria, and the Christmas tree at Balmoral in 1840. It spread across Europe in the 19th century, and at its end, Oliver Wendell Holmes is traditionally credited with bringing the Christmas tree to America towards the end of the century. Well, that gets us the celebration, but what about the birthday of what Matthews calls the child of wonder? The winter solstice has always been a time of celebration, whether it is the return of the sun, the promise of evergreen boughs, or the birthday of the midwinter king. This wondrous child, celebrated in so many ways and throughout such an extended period of time, has had many names, though he and it always seems to be a male child, shares characteristics despite different cultures and periods in which he has come into being. A surprising number of gods of ancient classical world shared nativity stories that would later influence the development of the story of the birth of Jesus. Among those recorded are Tammuz, Mesopotamia, Attis, Asia Minor, Apollo and Dionysius, Greece, Mithras, Rome, Baal in Palestine. All were wonder children born under extraordinary circumstances and conditions at or near the time of the winter solstice. Today we celebrate the birthday of Christ on December 25th without thinking. Yet it was 400 years after the birth of Jesus that the date was fixed. The Church Fathers did not institute the festival until the 4th century, later even than good St. Nicholas lived. And having no exact references to the birthday of Jesus, they borrowed a festival from another great midwinter event, the Roman celebration of the birth of the unconquered sun, which was declared to fall on December 25th by Emperor Aurelian in AD 274. In fact, there had been a cult of Sol in Rome from very early times, possibly even from the time of the Etruscans, who predate the Romans by several hundred years. There seems to be a foundation of much of the classical world. Then in about 10 BC, another Roman emperor, Augustus, replaced Sol with the Greek Apollo and instituted celebratory games. Mithras' birth was attended by shepherds at the end of his time on earth. When Mithras returned to his father, he took a Last Supper with his followers, later remembered by believers in a communion of bread and wine. At the end, he was believed not to have died, but ascended to heaven, whence he is believed he would return at the end of time to raise the dead from their tombs for a final judgment. The parallels between this and the Orthodox Christianity teachings are too close to be a mistake. Now, Constantine actually set the date, not the Christian Fathers, probably around 360 AD. Before he became a Christian, he was only baptized on his deathbed, he associated himself in public with Apollo, and then the unconquered sun, unconquered because it returns in midwinter, then added Mithras. Constantine was a neat freak. He ordered all sons to follow their fathers into their profession. He set uniform prices for all markets in the empire. He called the Council of Nicaea to straighten out a messy Christianity. He let them settle arguments as they would, then ruthlessly enforce the decisions on all Christianity. He used logic and reason. He was used to celebrating the birth of his god in midwinter, as were the rest of the empire. No one knew the real birthday of Jesus. December 25th was a logical, reasonable choice. This is Hugh Henry for Freethought Forum, talking about ancient origins of Yule. Let's read about another wonder child, but not one you know. Life of a famous man who lived 2,000 years ago in a remote part of the Roman Empire. From the beginning, his mother knew that he was an ordinary person. Prior to his birth, a heavenly figure appeared to her, announcing that her son would not be a mere mortal, but would himself be divine. This prophecy was confirmed by the miraculous character of his birth, a birth accompanied by supernatural signs. The boy was already recognized as a spiritual authority in his youth. His discussions with recognized experts showed his superior knowledge of all things religious. As an adult, he left home to engage in itinerant preaching ministry. He went from village to town with his message of good news, proclaiming that people should forego their concerns about material things, such as this life, such as how they should dress and what they should eat. They should instead be concerned about their eternal souls. He gathered around him a number of disciples who were amazed by his teaching and his flawless character. They became convinced that he was no ordinary man, but was the Son of God. Their faith received striking confirmation in the miraculous things that he did. He could reportedly predict the future, heal the sick, cast out demons, raise the dead. Not everyone proved friendly, however. At the end of his life, his enemies trumped up charges against him, and he was placed on trial before Roman authorities for crimes against the state. Even after he departed this realm, however, he did not forsake his devoted followers. Some claimed he had ascended bodily into heaven. Others said he had appeared to them alive afterward, that they had talked with him and touched him and became convinced he could not be bound by death. A number of his followers spread good news about this man, recounting what they had seen him say and do. Eventually, some of these accounts came to be written down in books that were circulated throughout the empire. But I have doubt you have read them. In fact, I suspect you have never heard the name of this miracle-working Son of God. The man I'm referring to is the great neo-pagan Pythagorean teacher and pagan holy man of the 1st century, Apollonius of Tyana, a worshiper of Roman gods whose life and teachings are still available for us in the writing of his later 3rd century follower, Philostratus, in his book, The Life of Apollonius. Apollonius lived about the time Jesus. Even though they never met, reports about their lives were in many ways similar. At a later time, Jesus' followers argued that Jesus was the miracle-working Son of God, that Apollonius was an impostor, a magician, a fraud. Perhaps not surprisingly, Apollonius' followers made just the opposite claim, asserting he was the miracle-working Son of God and Jesus was a fraud. What is remarkable is that these were not the only two persons in the Greco-Roman world who were thought to have been supernaturally endowed as teachers and miracle workers. In fact, we know from tantalizing but fragmentary records that have survived that numerous other persons were also said to have performed miracles, to have calmed the storm and multiplied the loaves, to have told the future and healed the sick, to have cast out demons and raised the dead, to have been supernaturally born and taken up into heaven at the end of their life. Even though Jesus may be the only miracle-working Son of God we know in our world, he was one of many talked about in the 1st century. Finally, another wonder person, Santa Claus. We all know him, of course, the jolly old elf of The Night Before Christmas, the man in the red suit with the white beard who drives a sleigh pulled by flying reindeer, who comes down our chimneys on Christmas night to bring gifts to children who have been good. But do we really know him? Do we really know his true origins, his original purpose? In the Middle Ages, we have the story of St. Nicholas, a 3rd century bishop. But Santa is much older than that. much, much older even than Christianity itself. He is a magician, a shaman. Now, you have heard of the Druids of England, and the Finns had a reputation for powerful magicians. But in Northern Europe, there was one group respected and feared for their power and skill, the shamans of the Sami, the people of Lapland of the far north. And how did they travel? In sleds or sleighs pulled by reindeer. And what did they wear? Red trimmed with white and many bells. The figure who stands behind the jolly man of Christmas is older even than this, however. In fact, his story takes us back to the beginning of recorded history, when some other characters climbed up trees of a different kind and returned with gifts for everyone. These were not toys or perfume or watches, but messages concerning the year to come, or the turning of the seasons, or the fate of the world. These people were the shamans, who performed the functions of priest, historian, record keeper, scientist, and magician. Of course, there were shamans all over the world, and in most cases they performed very similar functions. But for obvious reasons, it is those who originated in the far north, anywhere from Lapland to Siberia, that interest us most in this context. It is these people who often wore bells on their ritual costumes, who shinnied up the central poles of their skin tents and returned with gifts of prophecy and wonder from the other worlds. It is to these people we have to look for the first appearance of the figure who, thousands of years later, evolved into the jolly old man of Christmas himself, Santa Claus. If we look for a moment at some of those similarities, we catch a glimpse of the evolution of one into the other. If we dip our hands into Santa's sack, so like the shaman's bag of tricks, the first thing we find are the bells that jingle on the harness of the 8 magical reindeer. Contemporary accounts of northern shamans, including those of the Altai, Buryat regions, of Siberia, and those of the Finns and the Laplanders, again and again emphasize the importance of bells in their traditional costumes. These form a double function, as noisemakers to announce the presence of shaman as he enters the spirit world, and to frighten off any unfriendly spirits who might be lying in wait for him. In addition, iron discs represented the sun, or curved to shape the moon, represent the importance of solar and lunar rites among these northern people, an important consideration in our talk about the solstice. Reaching into the sack again, we find a red robe or cloak trimmed with white. Many authorities in shamanic tradition have commented on the importance of the red color in shaman's costume. This is, on one level, significant of the sacred blood that links all human beings, that is also perceived as a link between humans and animals, and between the shaman and the earth. It is also, of course, a symbol of fire, that most powerful of magical weapons, as well as the gift of warmth and life to all, especially significant in cold lands as those we are considering here. Next in the sack we find a burning brand that signifies the eternal light and warmth, without which all life would perish. The shamans possessed this gift of fire, which initially perhaps they alone had the power to kindle. The number of flint fire lighters found among shamans' bundles alone is enough to suggest this. And which was the gift they brought to the tribal people they served. It was believed that these gifts were entrusted to them for the people by the gods and spirits of the land. Here the symbolism of red fire in the white desert of winter is a vital image. Is stretching a point too far to see an echo of this in the red and white costume and white beard of a certain other figure? Certainly the importance of these colors throughout the northern world is beyond question. Dipping into the sack again, we find reindeer with bells on their harnesses who can fly through the sky and cover vast distances in no time at all. This is yet another echo of the shaman's journey into and through the heavens in search of gifts of fire and prophecy. In addition, there is the obvious importance of reindeer to the people of Lapland and Siberia. Yes, well, Virginia indeed. Well, so the whole season is pagan, end to end. This has not gone unnoticed by right-thinking, upstanding, puritanical Christians, the kind that are worried that somewhere someone is having fun. I found this on the net, and I don't have time to read all of this, so I'll edit it on the fly. After the Reformation, godly Protestants in Europe were absolutely opposed to Christmas. It was despised by the Puritans and nonconformists in England. In 1644, when Puritans controlled the Parliament, it was declared no observation of Christmas was to be had on December 25th, but instead, it was to be observed as a normal market day. It was called the Profane Man's Ranting Day. At that time, troops would actually break up Christmas celebrations, tear down decorations, and arrest anyone holding a service on that day. Some who celebrated in Europe were also thrown in prison. America's settlers, Protestant America, rightfully considered Christmas a popish holiday. In fact, it was only in the early 1800s that several founding members of the New York Historical Society invented Christmas. Before then, it was illegal in colonial Massachusetts even to take December 25th off from work. Christmas was forbidden as unseemly to the spiritual welfare of the community. Christmas was banned in Massachusetts in 1659. This law remained for about 20 years. In Boston, public schools stayed open on December 25th until as late as 1870. It wasn't until 1836 that any state declared Christmas a holiday, Alabama. Then there were no more state declarations until the Civil War. So-called Christmas customs and traditions were concocted more for commercial purposes than religious. Henry Beecher, a Congregationalist, wrote in 1874 of his New England boyhood, "To me, Christmas is a foreign day, and I shall die so. When I was a boy, I wondered what Christmas was. I knew there was such a time because we had an Episcopal church in our town. I saw them dressing it with evergreens and wondered what they were taking woods into the church for. But I got no satisfactory explanation. A little later, I understood it was a Romish institution kept by the Romish church." From Alexander Hislop's Two Babylons, or Papal Worship. That Christmas is a pagan festival is beyond all doubt. The time of the year and the ceremonies with which it's celebrated prove its origin. Those who follow the custom of observing Christmas follow not the Bible, but pagan ceremonies. Since Christmas is not a biblical concept, why do you suppose it exposed for what it really is? People are angered. It angers Protestant people. There's a good reason why it does. When the pagan Christmas is rooted up and rejected, then what has become a Protestant tradition is being rejected. And that is why people become angry. If anyone dares to show up for what it really is, they face the wrath of the Protestant religious machine. And these days, that can be very ugly. In summary, there is no biblical warrant, precedent, or precept for the remembrance of the day of Christ's birth as a day of special religious celebration. This is not to say we shouldn't remember Christ's birth and its significance, but for religious commemorations or celebrations, we must have a biblical command or precedent. Important to remember is the early church did not celebrate Christ's birth. Such celebration only came after Christianization of pagan rites. Well, bah humbug indeed. So, December 25th was chosen for Christmas using logic and reason. The tradition dates from well before Christianity. In fact, from a time before the gods that made the gods. Right-thinking and upstanding Puritan Christians hate it. I can't think of a better reason to celebrate. This is Hugh Henry for Freethought Forum saying, let's party!
I think as I please, and this gives me pleasure.
My conscience decrees, this right I must treasure.
My thoughts will not cater
To duke or dictator, no person can deny. Dig-a-dong.